Metaphysics, the study beyond the physical. When people hear the word metaphysics, it can sound mysterious, almost mystical. But at its core, metaphysics is simply the branch of philosophy that asks the biggest, deepest questions about reality itself. It deals with what is, what it means to be, and what the ultimate nature of existence really looks like. Think of it this way. Science explains how things work, but metaphysics asks why there is something instead of nothing at all. It tries to go beneath the surface, to uncover the foundation that reality rests on. The word comes from the Greek roots meta, meaning beyond, and physis, meaning nature. So metaphysics is literally the study of what lies beyond the physical, beyond what we can touch and measure. Metaphysics is usually divided into a few key areas. One of them is ontology, the study of being. Ontology asks, what does it mean for something to exist? Are there different kinds of existence? Is there a difference between physical objects like trees and rivers and abstract objects like numbers or moral values? Another area is cosmology, which explores the origin and structure of the universe. Questions like, did the universe have a beginning, or has it always existed? Is time something real, or is it just a construct of the human mind? Metaphysics also deals with the relationship between mind and matter. Are we purely physical beings, or is consciousness something separate? Is free will real, or are all our actions determined by forces beyond us? These questions tie metaphysics into philosophy of mind and even into modern neuroscience. What makes metaphysics so fascinating is that it's both ancient and timeless. The earliest philosophers in Greece, like Thales, Parmenides, and Aristotle, were already asking metaphysical questions. And today, those same questions echo in debates about artificial intelligence, quantum physics, and the search for meaning in life. Some critics argue that metaphysics is pointless speculation, that we should only focus on what can be observed and tested. But defenders of metaphysics say that even science itself rests on metaphysical assumptions. For example, science assumes that the world is real, that it follows consistent laws, and that our minds are capable of understanding it. Those are metaphysical ideas. At its heart, metaphysics is a way of stretching our minds. It forces us to consider the ultimate ground of everything we take for granted. It doesn't promise easy answers, but it gives us a framework for wrestling with questions that are too big for any single science to handle. So, when we talk about metaphysics, we're not just diving into abstract puzzles. We're stepping into a tradition of wonder, a human attempt to understand existence itself. Ontology, the study of being. Ontology is one of the oldest and most fundamental branches of philosophy. It sits at the heart of metaphysics, asking the most basic but profound question: what does it mean to be? When we talk about ontology, we're exploring the categories of existence. What kinds of things exist in the world? Do only physical objects exist, like rocks, trees, and planets? Or do abstract things like numbers, ideas, and morals also have some kind of existence? Ontology also asks whether existence itself comes in different forms. For example, does the way a chair exists differ from the way the number 3 exists? Is the existence of a person different from the existence of space or time? One classic debate in ontology is between realism and nominalism. Realists believe that universals, things like redness or beauty, exist independently of us. Nominalists argue that these are just names we give to patterns we see in the world, not real entities in themselves. So, are universals real things out there in the universe? Or are they just convenient labels created by the human mind? Another central question is about identity. What makes something the same thing over time? If a ship has all its parts replaced one by one, is it still the same ship? This is the famous ship of Theseus problem, and it shows how tricky it can be to pin down the meaning of existence. Ontology also explores the relationship between parts and wholes. Is a person just the sum of their physical parts? Or is there something greater, something that makes a person more than just a collection of cells and molecules? In modern times, ontology is not just for philosophers. It also plays a role in computer science, artificial intelligence, and information systems. When we design databases or teach AI how to understand the world, we're essentially building little ontologies, structured maps of what exists and how things relate. What makes ontology so fascinating is that it shapes the way we think about everything else. Before we can ask whether something is true, useful, or beautiful, we first have to ask, does it exist at all? And if it does, in what sense does it exist? At its core, ontology invites us to look deeper into the most ordinary things and ask extraordinary questions. It challenges us to think about existence not as something obvious, but as a mystery worth exploring. Arche, the first principle of everything. The word arche comes from ancient Greek, and it literally means beginning, origin, or first principle. In philosophy, especially in early Greek thought, arche was the search for the fundamental element or principle from which everything in the universe comes. It's not just about where things start in time, but about the ultimate foundation of all existence. The earliest philosophers, called the pre-Socratics, were obsessed with this question. What is the basic stuff of reality? What is the one thing that lies beneath all the changes and appearances in the world? Let's start with Thales of Miletus, often considered the first philosopher. He argued that the arche of everything was water. Why water? Because water can transform into vapor, ice, or liquid. It can take many forms, yet remain the same substance. Then came Anaximander, his student. He wasn't satisfied with water being the foundation of everything. Instead, he proposed that the arche was the apeiron, which means the infinite or the boundless. According to him, the universe couldn't be reduced to any single physical element. It had to come from something beyond, an indefinite, limitless principle. So here we see an early move from physical explanations toward something more abstract. Then came Heraclitus, who made a radical claim. The arche was fire. But by fire, he didn't mean literal flames only. Fire was a symbol of change, of constant motion. Heraclitus believed that everything in the universe is in flux. You can't step into the same river twice, he said, because the waters are always flowing. For him, the principle behind existence was not stability, but transformation itself. On the other side, Parmenides rejected this whole idea of constant change. He argued that change is an illusion. Being is one, eternal, and unchanging. So for Parmenides, the arche wasn't fire, water, or air. It was being itself. What truly exists cannot come from nothing and cannot pass into nothing. And then there's Empedocles, who tried to bring these different views together. He suggested there isn't just one arche, but four: earth, water, air, and fire. These four roots, combined and separated by forces of love and strife, make up everything we see in the universe. Later, Democritus and Leucippus argued that the arche of all things was the atom, tiny, indivisible particles moving in the void. That idea might sound familiar, because it's a direct ancestor of modern atomic theory. What's important here is that the search for arche was the very beginning of philosophy and science. These thinkers were moving away from mythological explanations of the world, where gods and spirits controlled everything, and toward rational explanations based on observation and reason. Now arche is not just a historical curiosity. Even today, scientists and philosophers are still asking, what is the ultimate foundation of reality? Is it energy? Is it quantum fields, strings, or something we haven't even imagined yet? But arche isn't only about physics. It also has a broader meaning. In metaphysics, arche can be thought of as the first principle of thought, the grounding of truth. In ethics, one might ask, what is the arche of morality? Is it happiness, duty, survival? In political philosophy, people have asked, what is the arche of authority, consent of the governed, divine right, power itself? So arche is not just about a physical substance. It's about the ultimate grounding in every domain of human thought. It's the question of first causes, first principles, and first truths. Why does this matter? Because asking about Arche is a way of refusing to take the world for granted. It forces us to look beyond appearances and dig for the deeper unity beneath diversity. It reminds us that philosophy begins not with answers, but with the courage to ask, what is the true foundation of everything? Monism, the view that reality is one. Monism is the idea that, at the deepest level, all of reality is one single thing. Instead of many forces or substances, monism claims that everything comes from a single source. We usually think of the world as many separate things, trees, rivers, galaxies, people. But monism asks, are they really separate? Or are they all expressions of one underlying reality? Parmenides argued that being itself is one, eternal and unchanging. For him, multiplicity is an illusion. Later, Spinoza gave a powerful version of monism, saying God and nature are the same reality, one substance with infinite expressions. Monism can take several forms. Idealistic monism says everything is mind or consciousness. Materialistic monism says everything is matter or energy. And neutral monism suggests that both mind and matter are aspects of something deeper and more basic. Why does monism matter? Because it offers a vision of unity in a fragmented world. It suggests that behind all diversity there is one underlying whole, but it also raises hard questions. If all is one, how do we explain individuality? Are we truly separate persons or just expressions of the same reality? For many mystical traditions, realizing this unity is the goal of spiritual awakening. Critics, however, warn that monism risks oversimplifying or erasing difference. Still, the monist perspective is powerful. It invites us to see everything as connected, held together by a single truth. So the question remains, is reality ultimately one thing or many? And if it is one, what is that one thing? Matter, mind, spirit, or something we cannot yet imagine? Dualism, the battle between mind and matter. Dualism is the idea that reality is divided into two fundamentally different kinds of things. Most often, this means mind and body, or spirit and matter. Unlike monism, which says all is one, dualism says there are two distinct realms that cannot be reduced to each other. The most famous version comes from René Descartes in the 17th century. He argued that mind and body are completely different substances. The body is extended in space, measurable and mechanical. The mind, on the other hand, is thinking, conscious, and not bound by physical laws. Descartes summed this up with his famous line, "I think, therefore I am." But this view raises tough questions. If mind and body are totally separate, how do they interact? How does something non-physical, like a thought, cause my arm to move? And how does a purely physical brain generate feelings like joy, pain, or love? Dualism shows up outside of Descartes too. In religion, many traditions describe the human as a body and a soul. In ethics, people sometimes talk as if rational thought is in conflict with bodily desires. Even in everyday life, we often feel pulled between higher and lower parts of ourselves. Still, dualism has critics. Some argue that science increasingly shows mind and body are not separate. Brain scans reveal tight links between mental states and physical states. Injuries or chemicals in the brain can completely alter thoughts and emotions. If the mind were totally independent, how could that be? Others say dualism makes the problem worse by creating an unnecessary gap. Maybe consciousness isn't something separate, but rather something that emerges from the physical brain. Yet, dualism refuses to go away. Even if neuroscience advances, many people still feel that subjective experience, the what it's like to be conscious, cannot be reduced to matter. Is a thought really the same thing as a burst of neurons firing? Or is there something irreducible about inner experience? Philosophers have tried to bridge the gap with variations. Property dualists argue that while there is only one kind of substance, matter, it has two kinds of properties, physical and mental. Interactionist dualists believe mind and body do affect each other, while parallelists say they run side by side without ever touching. Why does dualism matter? Because it strikes at the heart of human identity. Are we just physical machines or something more? If we are purely material, what happens to free will, morality, or the soul? If we are more than matter, how do we explain the undeniable dependence of mind on the brain? Dualism leaves us with a tension. We experience ourselves as both physical beings in a material world and as conscious beings with thoughts, feelings, and freedom. Reconciling those two sides remains one of philosophy's greatest puzzles. So the question stands, are we matter and mind? Or is one of them an illusion? Idealism, is everything just mind? Idealism is the philosophical view that reality is fundamentally mental, or that consciousness is the foundation of everything. In other words, the world as we know it depends on the mind to exist. One of the earliest forms comes from Plato, who argued that the material world is just a shadow of a higher reality, the world of forms. Everything we see, trees, mountains, rivers, is imperfect compared to eternal ideas like beauty, justice, or goodness. So the physical world isn't truly real in the ultimate sense. Later, George Berkeley took this further. He claimed that objects exist only when they are perceived. To be is to be perceived, he said. If no mind observes a tree, does it exist? According to Berkeley, everything depends on perception, and ultimately on the mind of God to maintain reality. Idealism isn't just about abstract thinking. It raises questions about perception, knowledge, and reality itself. If everything depends on the mind, can we trust our senses? Or are they just interpretations in consciousness? Critics of idealism argue that the physical world seems independent. Rocks fall, rivers flow, and stars shine whether we are looking at them or not. How can all of this depend on minds? Despite the criticisms, idealism has influenced philosophy, psychology, and even physics. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics echo idealist ideas. The act of observation affects reality. Consciousness might play a more fundamental role than we imagine. Idealism challenges us to reconsider what is real. Are we living in a purely material universe, or is everything ultimately a product of mind? And if mind is primary, what does that mean for life, knowledge, and existence itself? Materialism, is everything just matter? Materialism is the philosophical view that reality is fundamentally physical. Everything that exists, people, trees, thoughts, even consciousness, emerges from matter and its interactions. In other words, the world is made of stuff, and nothing exists beyond it. Ancient philosophers like Democritus and Epicurus argued that everything is composed of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms. Even the mind, they believed, is a complex arrangement of matter. Today, neuroscience continues this line of thinking, suggesting that thoughts, emotions, and consciousness emerge from brain activity. Materialism contrasts sharply with idealism. If the world is purely material, then ideas, beliefs, and consciousness are byproducts of physical processes. But how exactly does matter create subjective experience? This is often called the hard problem of consciousness. Critics argue that materialism struggles to explain the richness of experience, the taste of chocolate, the feeling of love, or the awareness of being. Can these really be reduced to mere chemical reactions? Despite the challenges, materialism underpins most modern science. Physics, chemistry, and biology operate on the assumption that the universe follows consistent physical laws. Nothing needs to exist beyond the measurable world for science to work. Materialism also influences ethics, politics, and society. If humans are physical beings, then our behavior can be studied, predicted, and sometimes modified. This can lead to debates about free will, responsibility, and the nature of life itself. At its core, materialism challenges us to find meaning within the physical universe. If nothing exists beyond matter, then how do we live consciously, ethically, and creatively in a world without ultimate non-material foundations? Atomism, the building blocks of reality. Atomism is the idea that everything in the universe is made of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms. These atoms combine, separate, and move in the void to create all the matter and phenomena we observe. But what does this really mean for reality? The concept dates back to Leucippus and Democritus in ancient Greece. They believed that beneath all the variety of things, trees, rivers, animals, even humans, there are fundamental units that never change. The differences we see in the world arise from the arrangement and movement of these tiny particles. Later, Epicurus developed atomism further. He argued that atoms are eternal and infinite, moving according to natural laws. There's no need for divine intervention. The universe can explain itself through the interactions of these small building blocks. Atomism influenced modern science profoundly. Today, physics and chemistry rely on the idea that matter is made of atoms and subatomic particles. But philosophers continue to ask, is the universe truly reducible to indivisible units? Or is there something deeper, like energy or fields, underlying even atoms? Atomism also intersects with questions of mind and consciousness. If everything is made of matter, can thoughts, feelings, and consciousness also be reduced to arrangements of atoms? Or is there something non-physical at play? Critics of strict atomism point out that reduction alone may not explain emergence. The way complex systems, like life or consciousness, appear from simpler components. Just because you understand atoms doesn't mean you fully understand a living organism, a brain, or an ecosystem. Still, atomism teaches us to look for simplicity behind complexity. It invites us to ask, if all things are made of the same tiny units, what unites them? And how does simple matter give rise to the richness of life and experience? Pluralism is reality made of many fundamentals. Pluralism is the philosophical idea that reality is not reducible to a single substance or principle. Unlike monism, which says everything is one, and dualism, which says there are two, pluralism argues that the world consists of many irreducible components or elements. But what does that mean for our understanding of existence? The idea goes back to Empedocles, who proposed four roots of all matter: earth, water, air, and fire. These elements mix and separate under the influence of love and strife to produce the diversity we see in the world. For him, reality was a complex, interacting system of multiple fundamental forces, not a single unifying substance. Later, philosophers like Leibniz developed pluralist ideas in metaphysics. Leibniz proposed that the universe is composed of simple, indivisible units he called monads. Each monad reflects the entire universe in its own way, and together they form a harmonious whole. Pluralism, in this sense, shows that reality can be both many and unified, complex yet structured. Pluralism also addresses debates in ethics, politics, and culture. In ethics, pluralists argue that there are many equally valid values or moral principles. In politics, pluralism emphasizes that multiple groups, ideas, and interests coexist and must be balanced. In society, it celebrates diversity rather than enforcing uniformity. Philosophically, pluralism challenges us to accept complexity. If reality is plural, then simple, one-size-fits-all explanations are inadequate. There is no single element, principle, or law that fully explains the richness of the universe. Every aspect, from atoms to galaxies, from mind to culture, has its place, and each contributes to the tapestry of existence. Critics sometimes argue that pluralism risks fragmenting reality, leaving no ultimate grounding for knowledge, ethics, or meaning. Yet pluralism can also be liberating. It encourages exploration, dialogue, and creativity, reminding us that reality is a web of many interconnected truths rather than a single absolute. So we are left with the question, is the universe ultimately one, two, or many? And if it is many, how do these diverse elements come together to create the world we experience? Realism: does the world exist independently of us? Realism is the philosophical position that the world exists independently of our perceptions, beliefs, or consciousness. In other words, reality is out there, whether or not we observe it, think about it, or even know it exists. Classical realism can be traced back to Aristotle, who argued that things have an existence and nature of their own. A tree, for example, is not merely an idea in someone's mind. It has properties, structure, and functions independent of whether anyone perceives it. Reality, in this view, has an objective order. Realism stands in contrast to idealism, which says that reality depends on the mind, and to certain forms of relativism or constructivism, which claim that truth is shaped by human perspective. Realists insist that while our knowledge of the world may be imperfect, there is still a world out there that can be studied, described, and understood. Modern science often operates under realist assumptions. When physicists study atoms, galaxies, or forces, they assume these entities exist independently of human observation. Even when theories change, the aim is to describe reality as it is, not just how it appears to us. There are different forms of realism. Naive realism suggests that the world is exactly as we perceive it. Scientific realism holds that the entities posited by our best scientific theories, electrons, black holes, DNA, really exist. Moral realism claims that moral facts, like right and wrong, exist independently of human opinions. Critics challenge realism by pointing out that our perceptions are fallible. Optical illusions, cognitive biases, and cultural differences all show that we might misinterpret reality. If our senses are imperfect, how can we be certain about what exists? Yet realism remains a powerful framework. It encourages us to seek truth beyond our personal experiences and to assume that some facts about the world are not contingent on human thought. Realism grounds philosophy, science, and ethics in the belief that the universe has an objective structure waiting to be understood. So the key question is, does reality depend on us, or does it exist independently? And if it exists independently, how much of it can we truly know? Epistemology, how do we know what we know? Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge itself. It asks fundamental questions. What is knowledge? How do we acquire it? And how can we be certain that what we believe is true? At its core, epistemology examines the relationship between the knower and the known. For example, when you see a tree, how do you know it's really there and not an illusion? How do your senses, reasoning, and memory contribute to your understanding of reality? Classical epistemology goes back to Plato, who famously defined knowledge as justified true belief. According to him, it's not enough to believe something and have it be true. You must also have a good reason, a justification, for holding that belief. Different schools of thought have offered diverse answers. Rationalists argue that knowledge comes primarily from reason and innate ideas. Empiricists insist that knowledge comes from experience and observation. Skeptics challenge both, asking whether we can ever truly know anything at all. Epistemology also explores the limits of knowledge. Can humans ever have absolute certainty, or is all knowledge fallible? What counts as evidence, and how do we evaluate it? How do perception, language, and culture shape what we believe to be true? Modern epistemology intersects with science, technology, and artificial intelligence. In an era of information overload, fake news, and algorithms shaping our perceptions, questions about knowledge and justification are more urgent than ever. How do we know which sources to trust? Can we be confident in our understanding of the world, or are we always interpreting filtered data? At its heart, epistemology challenges us to think critically. It encourages curiosity, skepticism, and the careful evaluation of claims. It reminds us that knowing something is not the same as merely believing it, and that understanding the world requires reflection, evidence, and reason. So we are left with the essential question: what can we truly know? And how do we separate genuine knowledge from illusion, opinion, or error? Skepticism: can we really know anything? Skepticism is the philosophical approach that questions the possibility of knowledge. Skeptics ask, can we ever be certain about anything? How do we know that our beliefs correspond to reality? The roots of skepticism go back to ancient Greece. Pyrrho of Elais argued that because the senses and reasoning can deceive us, we should suspend judgment on all matters. By doing so, one could achieve ataraxia, a state of mental tranquility, free from the anxiety of being wrong. Later, academic skeptics in Plato's school refined the idea. They suggested that while absolute certainty might be impossible, we can rely on probability and reasoned judgment to guide our actions. Skepticism, in this sense, doesn't mean total paralysis. It encourages careful evaluation rather than blind acceptance. Skeptics often challenge assumptions in science, religion, ethics, and everyday life. How do we know the world is as it appears? How do we know other minds exist? Can moral truths be certain, or are they culturally constructed? Modern skepticism influences critical thinking and the scientific method. Science itself embraces a kind of controlled skepticism. Hypotheses must be tested, evidence must be scrutinized, and conclusions are always provisional. Even widely accepted theories can be overturned with new evidence. Critics of skepticism argue that extreme skepticism can lead to inaction or nihilism. If we doubt everything, can we ever make decisions, build knowledge, or act meaningfully? Yet moderate skepticism serves as a powerful tool. It teaches us to question assumptions, seek evidence, and remain open to revising our beliefs. At its core, skepticism reminds us that knowledge is fragile and complex. It challenges us to distinguish between belief, opinion, and justified knowledge, and to always ask, how do I know what I think I know? So the enduring question remains, can we ever truly know anything with certainty? Or is all knowledge provisional, subject to doubt and revision? Rationalism, can reason alone reveal truth? Rationalism is the philosophical view that reason is the primary source of knowledge. Rationalists argue that certain truths can be known independently of experience, through logic, mathematics, or innate ideas. But what does this really mean? The roots of rationalism are found in thinkers like René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Descartes, for example, famously sought indubitable knowledge. He doubted everything he could, his senses, his body, even the physical world, until he reached one certainty. I think, therefore I am. From this foundation, he tried to build knowledge through reason alone. Rationalists believe that some concepts, like mathematics or logical principles, are not learned from experience. They are known through the mind itself. For example, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is true whether or not we see 2 apples and 2 oranges. These truths are necessary, universal, and accessible through reasoning. Rationalism contrasts with empiricism, which emphasizes that knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. Rationalists argue that senses can deceive us, but reason allows us to access truths that are stable and reliable. Can we trust what we perceive, or must we rely on thought, deduction, and innate ideas? Critics of rationalism point out that reason alone may be insufficient to understand the world. Without empirical evidence, how do we know that our logical deductions correspond to reality? Science shows that observation and experimentation are essential to knowledge. Despite criticisms, rationalism profoundly shaped philosophy, mathematics, and science. It encourages logical rigor, structured thinking, and the search for foundational principles. It also raises important questions about the nature of knowledge itself. Are some truths universal and independent of experience? At its core, rationalism challenges us to think systematically and critically. It asks us to consider what can be known through the mind alone and how reasoning can guide us toward certainty. So the essential question remains, can reason alone reveal the truth about the world? Or do we always need experience, observation, and evidence to truly know? Empiricism, is knowledge born from experience? Empiricism is the philosophical view that all knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. Unlike rationalism, which emphasizes reason and innate ideas, empiricists argue that we learn about the world by seeing, hearing, touching, and interacting with it. But how far can experience alone take us? The roots of empiricism are found in thinkers like John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. Locke argued that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. All ideas, beliefs, and knowledge are written on it through experience. We do not know colors, sounds, or objects without perceiving them first. Berkeley pushed this further, claiming that the existence of objects depends on being perceived. Hume explored the limits of empirical knowledge, questioning whether cause and effect are actually observed or just habits of thought. We see events following one another, but can we ever truly know the necessary connection between them? Empiricism emphasizes observation, experimentation, and evidence. It forms the philosophical foundation of modern science. Scientific knowledge is provisional and subject to testing, because it is derived from experience. Yet empiricists must also grapple with questions. Can we trust our senses? Are there truths beyond what we can observe? Critics of empiricism argue that some knowledge, like mathematics, logic, or moral principles, seems independent of experience. For example, the truth that 2 plus 2 equals 4 does not require seeing 2 apples and 2 oranges. Can experience alone account for such universal truths? Despite these debates, empiricism shapes the way we explore the world. It teaches skepticism, careful observation, and the importance of evidence. It reminds us that knowledge is grounded in interaction with reality, and that understanding grows through perception, experimentation, and reflection. So the essential question remains: is knowledge entirely derived from experience? Or are there truths that reason can access independently? Solipsism: is everything just in my mind? Solipsism is the philosophical idea that only one's own mind is certain to exist. According to this view, the external world, other people, and even the universe itself might not exist independently. They could all be creations of your consciousness. But is this even possible? The roots of solipsism are found in debates about knowledge and perception. If all we ever experience is filtered through our mind, how can we know that anything exists outside it? Your senses could be deceived, your thoughts could be self-contained, and the world might be nothing more than a projection of your mind. Solipsism challenges the assumptions we take for granted. When you interact with other people, do they truly exist, or are they constructs of your consciousness? When you observe a tree or a star, is it an external reality or just an idea in your mind? Critics of solipsism argue that it is practically impossible to live as if nothing else exists. Relationships, social interactions, and shared knowledge suggest that other minds are real. Yet, solipsism remains a powerful philosophical thought experiment, forcing us to question the certainty of knowledge. Solipsism also raises deep questions about perception and reality. If the world exists only in the mind, what does that mean for truth, morality, or meaning? Does reality require observers to exist? Despite its extreme perspective, solipsism highlights an important insight. Our knowledge of the world is always mediated by consciousness. Every perception, thought, and experience passes through the lens of the mind. Understanding this can make us more reflective, more careful in judging reality, and more aware of the mysteries of consciousness itself. So the ultimate question remains: can we ever truly know that anything exists outside our own mind? Or is all of reality just a projection of our consciousness? Pragmatism: does truth depend on usefulness? Pragmatism is the philosophical approach that evaluates ideas, beliefs, and theories based on their practical effects and usefulness. According to pragmatists, the value of a concept lies in what it can do, not just in abstract reasoning. But what does this mean for truth? The roots of pragmatism are found in thinkers like Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and John Dewey. Peirce introduced the idea that beliefs are rules for action, If a belief guides successful action, it has meaning. William James expanded this, arguing that truth is not fixed. It is something verified through experience and practical outcomes. Pragmatism challenges traditional notions of absolute, eternal truth. Instead, it asks, does an idea work in practice? If believing in a concept helps us navigate life, make decisions, or solve problems, then it has pragmatic value. But usefulness is not the same as mere convenience. Pragmatism also considers long-term consequences and reliability. Critics argue that pragmatism risks reducing truth to what is merely expedient or socially convenient. Does something become true just because it works temporarily? Pragmatists respond that truth is always tested in real-world contexts, and its endurance through experience is what gives it meaning. Pragmatism also influences science, education, politics, and ethics. Scientific theories are valued for their predictive power. Education is focused on learning by doing. Policies are judged by the outcomes they produce. Life itself, in the pragmatist view, is a series of experiments in thought and action. At its core, pragmatism teaches flexibility, adaptability, and the importance of results. It reminds us that ideas are tools, and their worth is measured by how effectively they help us navigate the world. So the question remains, is truth absolute and eternal, or is it something practical, evolving, and tested through action? Phenomenalism, is reality just what we perceive? Phenomenalism is the philosophical view that physical objects and the external world exist only as perceptual phenomena. In other words, to be is to be perceived. Things exist in relation to our experiences of them, and reality is ultimately a construct of sensory perception. But what does this mean for the world beyond our senses? The roots of phenomenalism are found in George Berkeley, who famously said, "To be is to be perceived." He argued that objects do not exist independently of being observed. Even when no human mind perceives them, they continue to exist in the mind of God, ensuring the continuity of reality. Phenomenalism challenges the assumption that the external world is fully independent. How can we know that objects exist as they appear, rather than being projections of our mind? Our perception is always mediated by senses, which can be limited or deceived. The color of a rose, the sound of a bell, or the weight of a stone exists as sensory experiences, not as independent, mind-free entities. Critics argue that phenomenalism struggles to explain scientific realism. Electrons, black holes, and subatomic particles seem to exist whether anyone perceives them or not. Yet phenomenalists respond that we only know these entities through their effects on our perceptions, experiments, and instruments. Phenomenalism also intersects with epistemology and consciousness. It highlights the central role of experience in shaping knowledge. Reality, according to this view, is inseparable from how it appears to us. Everything we know about the world is filtered through perception, thought, and awareness. At its core, phenomenalism reminds us of the intimate connection between mind and world. It encourages careful reflection on how we know what we know, and the ways our experiences shape the reality we perceive. So the ultimate question remains, do objects exist independently of our perception? Or is all of reality fundamentally tied to how we experience it? Coherentism, is knowledge a web of beliefs? Coherentism is the philosophical theory that knowledge and justification depend on the coherence of beliefs with one another, rather than on a foundation of indubitable truths. In other words, a belief is justified if it fits well within a consistent and mutually supporting network of other beliefs. But how does this really work? Instead of relying on a foundational belief that is absolutely certain, coherentists argue that our beliefs form a web. Each belief gains support from the others, and the overall system is evaluated for consistency, explanatory power, and mutual reinforcement. If all the threads hold together, the network is considered rational and justified. Coherentism contrasts with foundationalism, which claims that knowledge rests on a small set of basic, self-evident truths. Coherentists reject the idea that certainty must come from a single starting point. Instead, they focus on the relationships between beliefs. Do they make sense together? Do they support and explain each other? Critics of coherentism point out that a set of beliefs could be internally consistent, yet completely disconnected from reality. A fictional story could form a coherent web, but that doesn't make it true. How do we ensure that coherence also tracks truth? Despite these concerns, coherentism highlights an important aspect of human thinking. Our knowledge is rarely isolated. We rely on reasoning, context, and interconnections to make sense of the world. Science, philosophy, and everyday reasoning often operate in a coherentist fashion, testing theories for consistency and explanatory power. At its core, coherentism emphasizes the relational nature of knowledge. It reminds us that justification is not always linear or foundational, but arises from the harmony, consistency, and mutual support of our beliefs. So the essential question remains: is knowledge justified by an unshakable foundation? Or is it justified by how well our beliefs fit together in a coherent web? Foundationalism. Does knowledge rest on solid ground? Foundationalism is the philosophical theory that all knowledge and justified belief rest upon a foundation of basic, self-evident truths. These foundational beliefs are considered indubitable. They do not require further justification because they are immediately certain or self-justifying. But can such a foundation truly exist? The idea is simple. In order to avoid an infinite regress of justification, there must be starting points. These starting points, or basic beliefs, provide the grounding for all other beliefs. For example, sense perceptions like "I am in pain" or logical truths like "a triangle has three sides" are often considered candidates for foundational beliefs. From these, more complex beliefs are built. Think of foundationalism like a pyramid. At the base are the fundamental beliefs, solid and secure. On top of them, layer by layer, we construct the rest of our knowledge. If the foundation is strong, the whole structure is stable. But if the foundation is weak, the entire system may collapse. Foundationalism stands in sharp contrast to coherentism. While coherentism emphasizes a web of mutually supporting beliefs, foundationalism insists that some beliefs need no support at all. They simply are, and everything else derives from them. Critics, however, raise important challenges. What qualifies as a truly basic belief? Can we ever be absolutely certain about sense perceptions which may deceive us? And if we cannot identify clear foundational beliefs, does the whole structure of foundationalism crumble? Despite these challenges, foundationalism remains one of the most enduring theories in epistemology. It reflects our natural desire for certainty, for bedrock truths on which all other knowledge can securely rest. So the core question is this: is knowledge ultimately built on a few unshakable foundations? Or is the very idea of a foundation an illusion, pushing us toward alternative models like coherentism and infinitism? Constructivism. Do we create reality through our minds? Constructivism is the philosophical view that knowledge is not something we simply find in the world, but something we actively construct. Instead of being passive recorders of reality, we shape and interpret our experiences through mental frameworks, culture, and language. But if this is true, how much of reality is out there, and how much of it is in here? At its core, constructivism challenges the idea of an objective, fixed truth that we can observe without influence. It suggests that what we call knowledge always depends on our perspective, background, and social context. Two people might witness the same event, yet describe it differently because their minds construct meaning in distinct ways. Does that mean there is no single truth? Or does it mean truth always comes filtered through interpretation? Educational theory often draws on constructivism. Teachers inspired by this view focus less on transferring facts and more on guiding students to build their own understanding. A student doesn't just memorize formulas. They construct meaning by solving problems, experimenting, and connecting concepts to their own experiences. Learning, in this sense, is not downloading knowledge but building it, brick by brick. Social constructivism goes further, suggesting that even things we think of as natural, such as gender roles, money, or even morality, are shaped by collective human agreements. We live inside systems of meaning we have created together. But this raises a question. If everything is constructed, is anything truly real? Critics worry that radical constructivism could slide into relativism, where all perspectives are treated as equally valid, making it hard to distinguish truth from opinion. Defenders counter that acknowledging construction doesn't destroy truth. It simply reminds us that truth is always seen through a lens. Constructivism leaves us with an intriguing tension. On one hand, we cannot escape our frameworks of meaning. On the other hand, those very frameworks allow us to learn, share, and create. So the puzzle remains. Are we uncovering reality piece by piece? Or are we endlessly building new realities of our own? Logic, how do we tell good reasoning from bad? Logic is the study of reasoning, the art of distinguishing valid arguments from faulty ones. Every time we try to persuade, debate, or even make sense of our own thoughts, logic is at play. But what makes reasoning valid? And how can we tell when something only sounds convincing but actually falls apart under scrutiny? At its foundation, logic is about structure, not content. If the structure of an argument guarantees the truth of its conclusion whenever the premises are true, then the reasoning is valid. For example, if we say all humans are mortal, Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal, the conclusion follows inevitably. That's deductive logic in action. But what about arguments that move from patterns to probabilities, like predicting the weather or trusting scientific theories? Those belong to inductive logic, where conclusions are strong or weak, but never absolute. Logic is not just an academic exercise. It shows up in everyday life. When we make decisions, weigh evidence, or catch ourselves saying, "Wait, that doesn't follow," we're relying on logical habits. Formal logic, with its symbols and rules, makes these habits explicit, almost like a grammar of thought. But does mastering this grammar make us immune to error? Not quite. Even with logic on our side, humans fall prey to biases and fallacies. Think of the ad hominem attack, where instead of answering the argument, someone attacks the person. Or the false dilemma, where only two choices are offered even though many more exist. Logic shines a light on these traps, but avoiding them takes discipline. Philosophers also debate whether logic itself is universal. Is there only one correct system of logic? Or can there be multiple logics, each with its own rules, like classical, modal, or fuzzy logic? Some argue that logic is a mirror of rational thought, while others see it as a tool humans invented to manage complexity. In the end, logic asks us to sharpen the way we think. It is less about having the right answers and more about asking, does my conclusion truly follow from my reasons? And if not, where did my reasoning go astray? Dialectics, can truth emerge from conflict and contradiction? Dialectics is the philosophical method of exploring ideas through tension, opposition, and dialogue. Instead of treating contradiction as failure, dialectics treats it as fuel for discovery. But how can clashing ideas bring us closer to truth? And what does it mean to think dialectically rather than linearly? The roots go back to ancient Greece, where Socrates engaged people in dialogue, asking probing questions until their beliefs revealed hidden contradictions. By exposing these tensions, he forced deeper reflection. For him, truth was not a fixed answer but something uncovered through discussion. Centuries later, Hegel took dialectics further, proposing that history itself unfolds dialectically, through a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Does progress always come through struggle and reconciliation? In dialectical thinking, contradiction isn't a dead end, it's a doorway. A thesis proposes an idea. An antithesis challenges it with its opposite. The clash doesn't destroy both, but leads to a higher-level synthesis that preserves parts of each while overcoming their conflict. Then the process repeats, endlessly. Can we ever reach a final synthesis? Or is this cycle the very heartbeat of thought and history? Marx adapted dialectics into materialism, arguing that the driving force of history is not pure ideas, but economic and social conflict. For him, dialectics explained why societies change. Contradictions between classes eventually give rise to new systems. Whether one agrees with Marx or not, his version shows how dialectics can stretch from philosophy into politics and history. Dialectics also applies to personal growth. We often hold conflicting desires or beliefs. Instead of choosing one and rejecting the other, a dialectical approach asks, is there a deeper resolution that transforms the conflict into something new? Critics caution that dialectics can be vague or overly optimistic, making it easy to force-fit any outcome into a dialectical story. Still, its power lies in reminding us that contradictions are not merely obstacles but engines of change. So the question remains, is truth best found in clear, linear reasoning? Or does truth only emerge when ideas collide, clash, and evolve through their contradictions? Deduction. What does it mean to reason with absolute certainty? Deduction is a form of reasoning where conclusions follow with necessity from their premises. If the starting points are true, the conclusion cannot be false. But how does this kind of certainty work? And why has deduction been seen as the gold standard of reasoning for centuries? Take a simple example. All mammals are warm-blooded. All dogs are mammals. Therefore, all dogs are warm-blooded. Here, the structure of the argument ensures that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. This is why deduction is often compared to mathematics. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4, no matter where or when you ask. But can human reasoning ever be as airtight as math? Deductive logic gives us clarity and precision. It helps us build systems of knowledge where truths interconnect without contradiction. Philosophers from Aristotle to Kant have treated deduction as essential to rational thought. Science, too, relies on deductive reasoning when moving from general laws to specific predictions. If gravity acts on all objects with mass, then this falling apple must obey it. But does deduction alone ever give us new knowledge? That question is key. Deduction is sometimes accused of being only a tool for unpacking what is already contained in the premises. It doesn't add fresh information. It only makes explicit what was implicit. For discovery, we may need induction or abduction. So is deduction powerful because it reveals new truths? Or because it guarantees we don't make logical mistakes with what we already know? In everyday life, deduction still guides us. If you know your keys are either in your bag or on the table, and you check the table and find nothing, then they must be in your bag. The reasoning is simple, but the certainty feels unshakable. Yet the strength of deduction depends entirely on the truth of the premises. If your premises are false, your deduction may be flawless but still lead to a false conclusion. Deduction gives us a glimpse of reasoning at its most rigorous. It asks us to think carefully about what follows necessarily, not just probably. So the question lingers, can deduction alone ever capture the fullness of human knowledge? Or is it only one piece in the larger puzzle of how we reason and understand the world? Induction. How do we learn from patterns and experience? Induction is a way of reasoning where we move from specific cases to general rules. Instead of guaranteeing certainty, induction gives us probability, patterns, and expectations. But how reliable is it to assume the future will resemble the past? And can we ever justify induction beyond simple habit? Imagine you see the sun rise every morning of your life. From this, you infer, the sun will rise tomorrow. That is inductive reasoning, using repeated experience to project into the future. Science thrives on this method. We observe, experiment, and then form general laws. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius under standard conditions. Metals expand when heated, gravity pulls objects downward. But are these laws absolute truths, or simply strong patterns supported by repeated evidence? David Hume famously raised the problem of induction. He argued that no matter how many times something has happened, we cannot prove it will always happen again. The future might not follow the same rules as the past. So why do we trust induction? Perhaps because our minds are wired to expect regularity, and society itself depends on this trust. But does that make induction a rational method, or just a deeply ingrained habit of thought? Induction comes in two main forms. Enumerative induction generalizes from many observed cases, like concluding all swans are white after seeing thousands of white swans. But a single black swan can overturn that belief. Then there's causal induction, where we infer causes from effects, like concluding fire causes smoke. But can we ever be sure we've identified the true cause? In everyday life, we lean on induction constantly. We predict traffic patterns from past commutes, trust food will taste the same as last time, or assume people will behave consistently. These inferences are rarely certain, but they guide action. Without induction, planning for the future would feel impossible. Induction teaches us humility. It offers powerful knowledge, but always with an asterisk. This is true so far. So the puzzle remains. Is induction the foundation of science and survival? Or is it an uncertain leap we make because we simply have no other choice? Abduction, how do we arrive at the best explanation? Abduction is a form of reasoning that seeks the most plausible explanation for observations. Instead of certainty, it offers the best guess that fits the evidence. But how do we decide what counts as the best explanation? And why do we so often rely on abduction in science, detective work, and everyday life? Consider this. You wake up and see the ground is wet. You reason it probably rained last night. That's abduction. The wet ground could have other causes, a sprinkler, a broken pipe, even a prank. But rain seems like the simplest, most likely explanation. Unlike deduction, which guarantees truth, or induction, which generalizes patterns, abduction deals with uncertainty and inference to the best explanation. But can best ever be measured objectively? Science often begins with abduction. Astronomers notice strange movements in the sky and hypothesize unseen planets. Doctors observe symptoms and propose a diagnosis. Detectives examine clues and build a theory of the crime. In each case, abduction sparks the leap from raw data to meaningful interpretation. But how do we guard against jumping to the wrong explanation? Philosophers note that abduction is less about formal rules and more about judgment, creativity, and plausibility. Simplicity, coherence, and explanatory power often guide our choices. If a theory explains more with less, we treat it as stronger. But is simplicity always a sign of truth, or just a bias toward neat answers? In daily life, abduction shapes how we navigate uncertainty. If a friend doesn't answer your message, you might infer they're busy. If you hear footsteps behind you at night, you might infer someone is following you. Sometimes these inferences are right, other times they're wrong, but without them we'd be paralyzed in confusion. Abduction highlights the human need for meaning. Faced with incomplete information, we reach for explanations, hoping to make sense of the unknown. So the question remains, does abduction bring us closer to truth? Or does it simply comfort us with stories that fit the pieces we happen to see? Fallibilism, can we ever be certain about anything? Fallibilism is the view that human knowledge is never absolutely certain. No matter how strong our evidence or reasoning, we could always be mistaken. But if error is always possible, does that mean knowledge is impossible? Or does it mean knowledge simply carries humility at its core? The idea traces back to ancient skepticism, but gained strength in modern philosophy. Charles Sanders Peirce, one of the founders of Pragmatism, argued that all of our beliefs are provisional. Even the most established scientific theories, gravity, evolution, relativity, could one day be revised or overturned. If that's true, how do we ever trust what we know? Fallibilism doesn't mean we know nothing. Instead, it suggests we can hold beliefs with confidence while acknowledging they might later prove false. Think of maps. They help us navigate the world, but no map is ever perfect. Some details are missing, others distorted. Yet we still use maps because they are useful, even if incomplete. Is knowledge just like that, useful but never flawless? This attitude also explains why science thrives on testing, criticism, and revision. Every claim must stay open to challenge. A fallibilist scientist accepts that new evidence could force an update. But does this endless openness lead to progress, or to doubt that never ends? In everyday life, fallibilism helps us stay flexible. If we admit we could be wrong, we listen more carefully, adjust more easily, and avoid dogmatism. But critics worry that too much fallibilism can breed paralysis. If certainty is impossible, why believe anything strongly at all? Fallibilism offers a middle path between skepticism and dogmatism. It says, we can know, but our knowledge is always tentative. So the enduring question is this: is wisdom found in chasing certainty, or in embracing the possibility that we might always be a little bit wrong? Paradox: what happens when logic turns against itself? A paradox is a statement or situation that seems self-contradictory, yet reveals a deeper truth, or sometimes sheer confusion. Paradoxes challenge our assumptions, expose limits in our reasoning, and force us to rethink what we thought we knew. But are paradoxes flaws in our logic, or windows into hidden layers of reality? Take the classic liar paradox. If someone says this statement is false, is it true or false? If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. The loop never resolves. Instead of offering clarity, it traps us in endless contradiction. Is this just a linguistic trick? Or does it reveal something profound about truth itself? Philosophy and mathematics are full of paradoxes. Zeno's paradox suggests that motion is impossible, because before reaching any point, you must first reach halfway, and before that, half of that, and so on, infinitely. Yet we walk, run, and move every day. How can something so simple as moving across a room defy pure logic? Paradoxes also show up in everyday life. Consider the paradox of choice. The more options we have, the freer we should feel. Yet often, more choice leads to anxiety and paralysis. Or think of the ship of Theseus. If every plank of a ship is replaced, is it still the same ship? Paradoxes like these stir debates about identity, continuity, and meaning. Some paradoxes eventually push philosophy and science forward. Russell's paradox in set theory exposed flaws in early mathematics and forced logicians to develop stronger systems. Others remain unresolved, serving as reminders of the mysteries that sit just beyond our grasp. In the end, paradoxes unsettle us. They pull the rug out from under our logical feet and leave us suspended in uncertainty. So the lingering question is this: are paradoxes signs of errors to be fixed, or invitations to expand the boundaries of thought beyond the limits of ordinary logic? Falsifiability: what makes a theory truly scientific? Falsifiability is the idea that for a theory to count as scientific, it must be testable in a way that could prove it wrong. A claim that can never, under any conditions, be shown false is not science but speculation. But why is being disprovable more important than being provable? And how does this shape the way we think about knowledge? The philosopher Karl Popper championed falsifiability in the 20th century. He noticed that many theories seemed convincing because they could explain everything, and therefore risked explaining nothing. Astrology, for example, can always twist events to match predictions, but can it ever be tested in a way that risks failure? Science, Popper argued, must take that risk. Consider Einstein's theory of relativity. It made bold predictions, such as light bending around massive objects. These predictions could be checked. If experiments had shown otherwise, relativity would have been disproven. That willingness to face potential falsification made the theory scientific. By contrast, a claim like everything happens for a reason is unfalsifiable. What evidence could ever prove it wrong? Falsifiability doesn't mean a theory is false, only that it puts itself on the line. A good theory survives attempts to disprove it, growing stronger through testing. But if it cannot be tested at all, it stands outside the boundaries of science. Does that mean unfalsifiable ideas are worthless? Not necessarily. Ethics, metaphysics, and art often deal in unfalsifiable claims, yet they remain meaningful. Still, Popper's standard reshaped how we judge knowledge. Instead of asking, "Can we prove this true?" he asked, "Could we ever prove this false?" The first question tempts us with certainty. The second keeps us honest, forcing us to stay open to evidence. So the question remains, is falsifiability the true mark of science? Or is it only one tool among many in the human search for reliable knowledge? Analytic philosophy: can clarity solve the biggest questions? Analytic philosophy is a tradition that emphasizes clarity, precision, and logical rigor in tackling philosophical problems. Instead of sweeping metaphysical systems or poetic speculation, analytic philosophers aim to break questions into smaller parts and analyze them carefully. But does breaking things down bring us closer to truth? Or does it risk losing the richness of big philosophical visions? The movement began in the early 20th century with thinkers like Bertrand Russell, G.E. Moore, and later Ludwig Wittgenstein. They were reacting against what they saw as vague or overly abstract philosophy. Their tool of choice was language and logic. If many philosophical confusions come from unclear language, then clarifying how we speak and reason might dissolve whole puzzles. But can language really cure philosophy? Analytic philosophy shaped much of modern thought. It gave rise to philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of science, often in close dialogue with mathematics and the natural sciences. The analytic style is characterized by careful arguments, technical terms, and sometimes even symbolic logic. But does this precision make philosophy more accessible, or does it make it feel more distant from everyday concerns? Critics argue that analytic philosophy can become too narrow, obsessed with word games rather than life's big questions. Continental traditions, in contrast, emphasize history, culture, and lived experience. Yet analytic philosophy's defenders say its strength is in discipline, demanding that arguments be clear, testable, and free from unnecessary obscurity. In practice, analytic philosophy has illuminated topics like reference, identity, knowledge, and consciousness. Even if it cannot answer every question, it sharpens the way those questions are asked. Perhaps the goal is not always to solve mysteries, but to strip away confusion and see what remains. So the key question lingers: does philosophy advance most through careful analysis and clarity? Or does true wisdom sometimes require stepping beyond analysis into the broader, messier terrain of human experience? The linguistic turn: does philosophy begin with language? The linguistic turn refers to a major shift in 20th century philosophy. The idea that many, if not all, philosophical problems are rooted in misunderstandings of language. If so, then the path to clarity is not through abstract metaphysics, but through analyzing the way we speak. But can language truly unlock the deepest puzzles of existence? Or does it only reshape the way we frame them? This movement is tied to philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein, Rudolf Carnap, and the logical positivists. They argued that questions about reality, knowledge, and meaning often dissolve when we clarify the language being used. For example, debates about whether numbers exist might not be about metaphysics at all, but about how mathematical language functions. But is philosophy reduced to word analysis in this view? The linguistic turn produced two major strands. One focused on formal logic and the precise structure of language, seeking to eliminate ambiguity. The other, influenced by the later Wittgenstein, emphasized ordinary language, how words are used in real-life contexts. If meaning comes from use, then philosophy's task is to study how language works in practice, not to chase hidden essences. But can studying everyday speech really answer the timeless questions of philosophy? Critics say the linguistic turn narrowed philosophy too much, turning grand mysteries into technical puzzles. Others praise it for cutting through centuries of confusion and making philosophy sharper, more grounded, and more scientific. In the end, the linguistic turn asks us to see philosophy itself through a new lens. Instead of asking, "What is reality?" it asks, "What do we mean when we say reality?" So the question remains, is philosophy